How many sets and reps should you be doing? Now, one thing to consider, reps are one of the first steps in creating a program. All the other parameters are determined by the number of reps. So this includes sets, tempos, rest intervals, exercise selection, and so on. So with reps, there is a correlation between the number of reps and the training adaptation. So the lower reps are more for neurological adaptations and the higher reps are more for metabolic adaptation. Comment down below what set and rep ranges do you usually train in. So most training and workout models and programs usually start off with a metabolic phase. So by starting off with a metabolic phase or a high rep phase, you're basically getting used to working out. And this is a much better way to start because the heavier weights you lift, the more susceptible you are to injury. So by easing your way in to the neurological adaptations, you are decreasing your risk of injury. So of course, one of the biggest factors to consider in any lifting program is what are your current goals? Are you trying to pack on body mass or do you want to get stronger? What's the plan? So around that 6 to 12 rep range, you're going to elicit the biggest response for gaining muscle mass and body mass. And in the lower rep ranges, about 1 to 5, that is where you elicit the biggest response for strength. So how long should you be doing high reps, medium reps, and low reps? Well, I think normally about a 1 month continuum is solid for this, so about 4 weeks. Some people like to push to 5 weeks, some 3, some even 6. So I think 4 is just like a solid number. It's pretty easy to track. It's like, hey, just 1 month at a time. This way you can kind of phase your training, and this is what a lot of people call shocking the muscle, because it's just long enough to stimulate and grow in that phase, but it's also not too long to the point where you're just becoming stale and doing it over and over and there's no new stimulus to be added. So as far as some of the general rules and principles for figuring out your rep range, here's some things to consider. The number of reps are going to dictate the amount of weight you do when pushing to failure or close to it. So for example, if you're going all out to failure, but you could only hit 3 reps of something, that weight is going to be heavier than if you're going all out to failure, hitting 6 reps of something, or even 20 reps of something. Keep in mind, even for people training for strength, the 4 to 6 rep range is probably a safer bet to take more often than not as compared to the 1 to 3 rep range. This is simply because you decrease your risk of injury. So it's not as hard on your joints and you don't burn out your CNS or central nervous system as fast. So really the 4 to 6 rep range is almost just as good as the 1 to 3, but it is safer and you can build and maintain muscle more that way. So certain but not all exercises require a specific rep range. So for example, if you're doing a full snatch or a full clean, you probably want to be in the 1 to 3 rep range simply because the amount of mechanics that go into this, and the more fatigued you get, the more likely you are to increase the risk of injury. And that can be said with many workouts, but these ones specifically require a lot of movement between the full body, and there's a higher chance of at least one of these going wrong. Power cleans, power snatches, and variants of these are probably best in the 1 to 6 rep range for similar reasons as the other ones, but you could see still in the lower rep range overall. Front squats probably less than or equal to about 6 to 8 reps. For exercises where you have a specific weak point, so for example, a lot of people have the weak point being their low back. RDLs, deadlifts, everything should be taken probably a lot lighter overall. So increase the rep range. Don't go as heavy as a weight until you get stronger. I don't have a lot of experience with those specific lifts personally, but I did have a professor at university that does and is very knowledgeable on those topics, and those were the recommended rep ranges that he gave me. That being said, on the other end of the spectrum, there are exercises that should be done in much higher reps, or at least higher than 6 reps, and these can include back extensions and sit-ups. With other bodyweight things such as dips, you want to be careful of going less than about 4 to 5 reps on it. You could end up with some sort of injury that way as well, especially if your mechanics aren't fully there yet. So how do you adjust these from workout to workout? You want to keep it rather close for depending on what your goal is. So for example, you could spend 2 workouts doing about 6 to 8 reps, and then the next 2 workouts maybe going 5 to 7 reps, and then 4 to 6 reps, and so on. And that way you also kind of lead into your next phase of training, especially if your next phase is strength training. However, when you are training, try not to spread your rep range out too much, especially for a specific lift, because if you're doing 15 reps this set and then 12 reps here, and then by the end of the set you're maxing out with 1 rep, you kind of don't really get enough stimulus in one zone, or enough stimulus in that one training zone to get the full effect out of it. One thing one of my professors explained this as is, think of it as a narrow pyramid that you're working up to, not a broad pyramid. Try to get within that range of what you are trying to train. One thing I will mention too is that if someone is an elderly person, a child, or a beginner lifter, you probably want to keep them in the higher rep ranges first, or at least for a while, until they are visibly comfortable with lifting heavier and heavier loads. That's not to say that a child cannot lift heavy or an elderly person cannot lift heavy. There has been proof of that, but that does not mean that all people are going to be able to lift heavier and in lower rep ranges right off the bat, or even after 6 months of training. So that's just something to keep in mind if you fall into one of these categories, or if you are helping someone with these rep ranges. If you are liking this video or have found it interesting so far, please be sure to drop a like down below. Sets. So there is an inverse relationship between sets and reps. So for example, the more sets you do, the less reps you do. The more reps you do, the less sets you do. So there's an inverse relationship between the two. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are going somewhat heavy, try to do fewer warm-up sets so you can kind of lead into those heavier sets a little bit sooner. That being said, don't rush the warm-ups, or don't not be warmed up before you hit those heavy sets. Just be aware you might be taxing yourself a little bit more, so you can't hit as many reps or as heavy as a weight as you could if you did fewer warm-up sets. So as far as training age goes, this does not mean how old you are. Training age is how many years you have been training for. As far as training age goes, the beginners probably don't need as many sets. You're going to get stimulus and growth regardless of how many sets you do. It's probably safer to keep it on the low end, not only for your mental health to keep you wanting to keep going, but you will end up seeing newbie gains pretty easily. That being said, if you have a more advanced training age, so you have been lifting for quite a few years now, then you might need to add more sets to certain workouts in order to trigger more of a stimulus effect, and you'll want your intensity to be increasing continually as well. So on a per workout basis, how many sets should you be hitting total? I think anywhere between 15 to 25 sets, not including warm-ups, is feasible enough where you are not overtraining yourself, but you are also not understimulating your muscles. So if you are training for strength, you will be doing less exercises and more sets. If you are training for size, you will be doing more exercises and less sets. Now, the number of sets that you are doing total will vary tremendously depending on what kind of athlete you are, what your training age is, and many other factors. If you are not sure how many sets you should be doing in a specific workout, assume less is better. This way you're not hurting yourself, you're not overtraining yourself. You could always add more, but you can't take away sets that you've already hit. If you're training for strength and you have to drop the weight the next set by about 7 to 10%, that should have probably been your last set. If you are training for size, let's say you hit that weight for 6 to 8 reps. If you end up getting 2 to 3 reps less than what you did on that previous set, then that should probably be your last set as well. So let's talk about the number of sets during a specialization phase, or to bring up a weaker body part. There are actually some cases in which 8 to 12 sets might be needed for a certain exercise, especially if you are specifically training for that exercise and your goal is to excel in it. If you're simply just trying to bring up a weaker body part, consider just adding more sets to that specific body part, especially if it is holding back your performance in other areas. So I'll bring it up again. If your low back is weak, consider working your low back a little bit more so it can help you with the squat, with that deadlift, and so on. So what are some steps to take in determining the number of sets you should be hitting in a workout? Let's just use the average example. A normal workout for most people is probably about 1 hour to 1.5 hours of training after warm-up. The total number of sets should rarely be over 25 sets, I would say, per workout. But again, that really depends on the specific goal you're training for. think about what exercises you're going to do and the number of them that you're going to do. And then of course you use the combination of sets and reps to determine your rest intervals and rest periods. So for example, the higher reps require less rest, the lower your reps are require more rest. What are some of the final set and rep guidelines? The number of sets per exercise decreases as the workout progresses. So this is essentially meaning you start with your heavier compound movements where you are doing more sets and probably heavier weights, and then as you go on to your accessory lifts and machines, then you are doing less sets and they require less weight compared to your compounds. And remember, the combination of those two determines your rest periods. So with the heavier weights, you will have a longer rest period and more sets. With the lighter weights, you will have less rest, but more reps. And again, this is really just because naturally, as you progress through your workout, you are going to be lifting lighter weights and the exercises become less important, so to speak, and they require much less skill, and they are mainly used for an assistance component. Consider subscribing to the channel if you are new, and here is the video YouTube thinks that you'll like next, so be sure to check it out right here. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.